The tragic war in Israel inflamed sentiments around the world, and as people very publicly chose sides, it drew some institutions into the controversy, including Harvard, which even its former president, Larry Summers, took issue with.
The statement by 30 student groups blaming all violence on Israel was a moral absurdity that appeared to reflect views at Harvard. And I thought it was very important that the Harvard administration, the Harvard leadership, made clear that those students were not speaking for the Harvard community. And at the same time, in the same way that previous leaders flew the Ukrainian flag over Harvard Yard after Putin's invasion, in the same way that Harvard stood with America after 9/11, I thought it was appropriate for there to be a strong Harvard statement condemning in the strongest possible terms Hamas terrorism. And after a couple of days without such a statement, I expressed my view publicly, having expressed it privately before. There was an initial statement that, frankly, wasn't very strong and didn't distance Harvard from the student groups. And now I'm glad to report that President Gay has condemned terrorism in strong terms and has distanced Harvard from the 30 student groups. So the kind of leadership response that I was looking for has now happened. There's still a lot of uncertainty and confusion, and so these are not going to be easy days to navigate, and there are agonizingly difficult questions around the response. On the one hand, there's a right of self-defense and a right of response. On the other hand, when Hamas is using human shields, is using hostages as human shields, there are incredibly difficult questions about the appropriate and prudent and morally right response.
You're not alone in taking issue here. Your fellow Harvard economist, Jason Furman, has spoken out as well. But also we have Bill Ackman, who says it's not enough just to speak out at this point. We should know the names of the students who participated in these statements because future employers should take that into account in their employment. Do you think it should go that far?
I think Bill's getting a bit carried away. Look, David, this letter was issued 6 hours after the attacks. Many in the groups had no idea that there was going to be a letter. Some who probably signed their groups on didn't fully know what they were signing. Some, I'm sure, were naive and stupid. I don't think this is a time for individual vilification. It's not a time for demonizing Israel, and it's not a time for demonizing students who weren't careful or who were silly in what they did. That's very important to maintaining a community. Bill's entirely right, and I would do the same thing as he does in wanting to make sure that the people I hired weren't people who stood with hate. But asking for lists of names, that's the stuff of Joe McCarthy, not the stuff, not what I think strong business organizations or universities like Harvard should be doing. I think we've got to keep a sense of proportion here. We've got to keep the temperature down. There are incredibly hard questions ahead of us around the response, and they're not going to be any good answers, but we may find less tragically bad answers if we can recognize the clear moral lines and then beyond that, support open debate.